The Irish poet W.B. Yeats's Leda and the Swan is a poem, at least on the surface, not about some natural object or persons or events. It is a poem about objects of art. That is, the paintings, the sculptures of Leda and the Swan. That is why we call it an Ecphrastic poem. That is, it is a poem about a work of art or works of art. Leda and the Swan is a sonnet, a Petrarchan sonnet as that. It has a proper rhyme scheme, that is AB, AB, CD, CD, EFG, EFG. It has its proper rhythm given by the iambic pentameter. It is divided into octave and sestet. That is, you have the first 8 lines that introduce you to the subject, and the succeeding 6 lines fathom the depth of the event. You know that Leda and the Swan is based on Greek mythology, which tells us that Zeus, the Greek god, felt captivated by Leda. King Tyndareus' wife wanted to make love with her. So he assumed the form of a swan and made love with Leda. That is in the bare background of the poem. Let's read the poem. A sudden blow, the great wings beating still, above the staggering girl her thighs caressed, by the dark webs her nape caught in his bill, he holds her helpless breast upon his breast. How can those terrified vague fingers push the feathered glory from her loosening thighs, and how can body laid in that white rush but feel the strange heart beating where it lies? One of the functions of art is to imitate reality, and the greater the artist, the more felicitous the portrayal of reality. Critics have often thought of the swan not as Zeus himself, but as his mighty member. His long neck has been compared with the penis, and the head with the glans, and his 2 wings with the scrotum. And with this, it is only natural, it is only to be expected that Zeus would rush to the fulfillment of his desire. A sudden blow, the great wings beating still, above the staggering girl, her thighs caressed. The swan has its feet on the thighs of the lady. Yeats must have thought of the Roman statues and the Hellenistic sculptures while writing these lines. A sudden blow, the great wings beating still, above the staggering girl her thighs caressed, by the dark webs her nape caught in his bill. Her nape caught in his bill. The back of Leda's neck has been held by force by the swan. So there is an element of rape in this act. He holds her helpless breast upon his breast. This is a highly erotic scene. How can those terrified vague fingers push the feathered glory from her loosening thighs? And how can body laid in that white rush but feel the strange heart beating where it lies? When we shift from the first 4 lines of the first stanza to the second, the scene as it were changes in the mind of the poet. He is now probably thinking of Michelangelo's painting of Leda and the Swan, which you have here in the background. How can those terrified vague fingers push? Leda here is not resisting the swan at all. Her fingers suggest that she is enjoying the entire event. She is entirely possessed by the swan, and she is drawing full satisfaction out of the congress. How can those terrified vague fingers push? The fingers suggest both fear and joy. The feathered glory from her loosening thighs, and her thighs. In the first stanza, you had the suggestion of holding the neck of Leda, a suggestion of rape. Now, it's no longer rape, it's a willing concourse that Swan is having with Leda. How can those terrified vague fingers push the feathered glory from her loosening thighs? And her thighs have begun to become loose, which is a sign of agreement, which is a sign of joint pleasure. And how can body laid in that white rush but feel the strange heart beating where it lies? And the swan has put his heart upon the heart of Leda, and there the octave ends and the sestet begins. A shudder in the loins engenders there the broken wall, the burning roof and tower, and Agamemnon dead. This is a slightly complicated section of the poem. On the one hand, you have the consummation of the congress in the act of orgasm, which is suggested by a shudder in the loins, engenders there the broken wall. It is as it were the rupture of the hymen that this suggests. But the poet seems to forget that Leda was a married lady. She was wife of Tyndareus. However, poets don't adhere to facts. Facts don't mean much to them. They live in the mind. In certain respects, they are true to the world in which we live. In other respects, they deliberately neglect the world in which they live. A shudder in the loins engenders there the broken wall, the burning roof and tower, and Agamemnon dead. Why is this reference to Agamemnon? Agamemnon was the husband of Clytemnestra. Clytemnestra, as you know, was the daughter of Leda. Her sister Helen had been seduced and taken away, abducted by Paris, which became the cause of the Trojan War. Agamemnon, Menelaus' brother, Helen's brother-in-law, had led the army to Troy to recover his sister-in-law, that is Helen. And in order to propitiate the god of the winds, he had sacrificed his daughter for the god, which had angered Clytemnestra. And Clytemnestra, during the absence of her husband, that is Agamemnon, fell in love with Aegisthus, and Clytemnestra and Aegisthus planned the murder of Agamemnon. And Agamemnon, when he returned after his victory in Troy, was murdered in the bathtub of his own palace. That is what Agamemnon dead refers to. A shudder in the loins engenders there the broken wall, the burning roof and tower, and Agamemnon dead. The burning roof and tower suggests, on the one hand, the bodily experience of Leda, on the other, the burning tower and roof of Troy. And then there is an intermezzo. Being so caught up. Caught up in what? Caught up in love? Caught up in war? Virgil had sung about arms and men. That is, love and war are two sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other. The beautiful and the ugly go hand in hand. Being so caught up, so mastered by the brute blood of the air, did she put on his knowledge with his power before the indifferent bee could let her drop? In the octave, Yeats described the mere act of love, the passion that goes with love. In the sestet, he goes ahead to fathom its meaning. What does love mean? Being so caught up, so mastered by the brute blood of the air, did she put on his knowledge with his power? Did she put on his knowledge with his power before the indifferent bee could let her drop? After the act of sex, after the congress, after the coitus, after the orgasm, the swans appeared to have lost interest in Leda. And did Leda acquire the thoughts of the god? Because after all, what did this act of coitus, this act of love-making result in? It resulted in war. Leda and the Swan was written at the request of a journalist of a political magazine. And as you would know, that Yeats was immensely interested in politics. He was for a time a member of the Senate as well. He was responsible for the movement that led to the founding of the Abbey Theatre, along with Lady Gregory and others. But what does it refer to? How is Leda and the Swan not just an ekphrastic poem, or in a way it could be superficially only an ekphrastic poem? In its depth, it can be a political poem. He hasn't mentioned Helen in this poem, but we know that Agamemnon's sister-in-law was Helen, for whom the Trojan War was fought, which was led by Agamemnon. So Helen is somewhere hidden in this poem. In No Second Troy, he had celebrated Helen. In other poems also, in among school children, for instance, he talks about the Ledaean person. So Helen is there. Who does Helen represent? Helen stands for, most certainly, Maud Gonne. Yeats had met Maud Gonne in 1898, and the year after, in 1889, I suppose, and a few years from that point of time, Yeats proposed Maud Gonne's hand in marriage. That is what in 1899. He repeated it in the next year, 1900, and again in 1901. But Maud Gonne went on and married Major John McBride. Yeats is probably thinking about the outcome of that marriage. Maud Gonne's marriage with McBride did not last. Yeats again proposed, and they spent a night fulfilling their love affair in Paris in 1908. That was about 5 years after the marriage of Maud Gonne with Major McBride. Yeats was so passionately in love with Maud Gonne that he went on and proposed the hand of Ecphrastic, Maud Gonne's daughter. And when that did not succeed, he married a lady, Georgie Hyde-Lees, in 1917, who was half his age. And thereafter, his poetry changed, because she did invisible writing, and this poem, Leda and the Swan, was first written around 1923, and it was published finally in 1928 in The Tower. What did Yeats think about naming real people in life as historical characters or mythical characters? He explained this in an essay called First Principles. He says, "We do the people of history the honor of naming them, after them the creations of our minds." We do the people of history the honor of naming after them the creations of our minds. Yeats thinks that by calling Maud Gonne as Helen, he is offering Helen the honor that a living artist does to an artist who has lived before. So by naming Maud Gonne as Helen, he is paying his respects to Homer as an artist. And he cites the example of Shakespeare's use of Richard II. Richard II, as Shakespeare made him, could never have been born before the Renaissance, before the Italian influence. So the Richard II of Shakespeare is not the Richard II of history. Richard II of history is a different person from the Richard II of Shakespeare. Shakespeare, to the making of him, he is typical not because he ever existed, but because he has made us know of something in our minds we had never known of had he never been imagined. Helen, as Yeats sees him, recreates Helen, because Yeats's Helen is not Homer's Helen. Homer's Helen is different from Yeats's Helen, and Yeats can see a personality which is different from the actual Helen. So much about the political aspect of the poem, but there is definitely a carnal side to it. The poem describes a love affair. Most of the Leda and Swan paintings were done because it was not considered proper to depict human lovemaking. But lovemaking being as close to the human experience as it is, we cannot expect the artist to neglect it. The highest life unites as in one fire the greatest passion and the greatest courtesy. The highest life unites as in one fire the greatest passion and the greatest courtesy. Indeed, the muses being women, all literature is but their love cries to the manhood of the world. I would read these two lines once again. Indeed, the muses being women, all literature is but their love cries to the manhood of the world. What does Yeats mean by manhood of the world? Manhood of the world, by manhood of the world, Yeats means the political man. By manhood of the world, Yeats means the commercial man, the man of getting and spending, the man who is jockeying for power, the man who is acquisitive. When he means man, he doesn't necessarily mean man as such. He means these desires, these political desires for power, which make individuals accept unlimited pain, and they also inflict pain on others. There is a beautiful poem called Politics by Yeats, in which he discusses this idea. And the epigraph to this poem reads thus: in our time, the destiny of man presents its meaning in political terms. In our time, the destiny of man presents itself in political terms. Human beings are political animals, but by being so, they inflict all the pain, all the hardship, all the tear and sweat on themselves and on others. Yeats' own words are very significant. How can I, that girl standing there, my attention fix on Roman or on Russian or on Spanish politics? How can I, that girl standing there, my attention fix on Roman or on Russian or on Spanish politics? Yet here's a travelled man that knows what he talks about, and there's a politician that has read and thought, and maybe what they say is true of war and war's alarms. But oh, that I were young again and held her in my arm. He is thinking of the girl, and he feels that he is old. He cannot hold that girl in his arm anymore. And this is what he desires. That is the natural man. Yeats thinks that when we act according to nature, we are happy. The result, the reward is happiness. But when we act against nature, as Maud Gonne was doing, as Constance Markievicz was doing, when people play politics, then they bring suffering to themselves and to others. Listen to these lines from In Memory of Eva Gore Booth and Con Markievicz. These sisters took part in the Irish independence movements, and Yeats was one of their best friends. They lived in a country house at Lissadell. Yeats writes, "Dear shadows, now you know it all the folly of a fight. Dear shadows, now you know it all the folly of a fight. With a common wrong or right, the innocent and the beautiful have no enemy but time. The innocent and the beautiful have no enemy but time." Time, you would remember, Shakespeare said, draws furrows in our brows. Time is the greatest destroyer of beauty, and Yeats is thinking about the impact of time on Maud Gonne, on beautiful women such as Eva Booth, Constance Markievicz. Dear shadows, now you know it all the folly of a fight. With a common wrong or right, the innocent and the beautiful have no enemy but time. The innocent and the beautiful have no enemy but time. Arise and bid me strike a match, and strike another till time catch. Should the conflagration climb, run till all the stages know we the great gazebo built. They convicted us of guilt, bid me strike a match and blow. Fire in Yeats's poems represents something that purifies. Time destroys, but time also purifies. It does away with all the ugliness, all the meanness, all the cowardice, and creates a new personality that is pure and perfect and a thing of art. And that is what Yeats does in this poem Leda and the Swan. Yeats's Leda and the Swan is a poem, the charms of which no lover of art can ever resist. Thank you.